now that we're in week 8, this is 2 months. How are we doing in terms of reopening? What's it looking like across the country?
Well, being Canada, it's different in every jurisdiction, so it's hard to summarize, but I think everybody has the same philosophy, more or less, is that you're going to open slowly and carefully, try things out, see how it works out. I think the one thing that no province wants to do is have a big surge in new cases and then have to shut down again. We've been doing this for 2 months. Nobody wants to go backwards. Everybody wants to go forward. Most provinces are being very cautious to avoid that.
And what are they saying about things like returning to work or kids returning to schools?
So it's gradual. So where do you start where it's safest, where you know there's going to be the least problems. So that's why we're seeing now almost every province has gardening centers open, outdoor work, construction work. The rules are different in different parts of the country again, but generally the stores that'll open first have doors that open on the outside. So it's again avoiding congregations indoors is what we want to do. So if you have a door that opens onto the street, it's easy to control 2 customers at a time, etc. So all these rules that we're going to get used to, I think, in the coming months.
I know a lot of parents are starting to get sick of the homeschooling situation. What do we know about daycares, or what do we know about schools returning to actual physical schools, not just laptops in your living room?
Yeah, so that's all over the map. Quebec, everyone probably knows Quebec is the most aggressive on this. Students in Quebec are going to go back to school on Monday, this coming Monday, except in Montreal. Montreal's been put off now 2 more weeks till the 25th. BC said today that school's not going back till September. So it's really, I think the most realistic, I know parents don't like it when I talk about this, but essentially this year is a wash, right?
Right.
This school year is done. We have to think about September. And I think what we have to think of in the interim is what are we going to do to keep kids from driving us and themselves crazy? So I think what school is going to be, if it returns, is going to be more of a summer camp or a day camp babysitting than school. So I think we have to wrap our minds around that, is what are schools going to be in the short term rather than the long term. So I think Quebec has made no secret of the fact they want kids to go back to school, not because they think they're going to learn much, but because they want their parents to go back to work. So it's an economic decision. It's not an education decision. Quebec's plans, again, they've been quite open about this, are based on the belief that only half the parents at the most will send their kids back. So we know that it's going to be voluntary. So that's another sign that there's not going to be a lot of schoolwork done. So it's voluntary, and it's, I think, a way of easing into it. We're going to see how it works out. A lot of this stuff are just natural experiments.
I mean, you mentioned Quebec's plan there a few times, especially around their school. We actually have had a number of readers submit questions ahead of time around the Quebec plan. And basically, most of those questions boil down to, do you think it's safe? Is what Quebec doing safe for the citizens there?
I think the answer to all these questions is we don't really know. It's a lot of guesswork. But I think I would try and answer it diplomatically by saying I think provinces like BC are being much more prudent. And that's probably good in the long run, to say, listen, let's give ourselves some time to figure this out. Quebec, there's a lot of unknowns. We don't know, you say there's going to be physical distancing in the classroom, but what does that mean? Are we going to, our schools are overcrowded. That's something that's very different from Europe to start off with. So if you go from, you can't social distance with 30 kids in a class, right? Our classrooms aren't that big. If 15 show up, maybe we can do it. Quebec has said there won't be gym class, there won't be music, because of shared instruments. Recess groups, no more congregations of more than 2 kids at a time. Now, who's going to police that and monitor that, especially with 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds? I just don't understand how that's going to happen. It's going to be very, very difficult.
How are hair salons going to work? I think Manitoba is allowing them as of next week or soon.
Yeah, so hair, anything like that is not that risky, because it's what you want to do ultimately. So the overarching philosophy in this is you want to reduce the number of people you interact with, right? So scientists use the term bubbles. So you want your bubble to be fairly restrained. So right now we have our bubbles are our families. What we're saying now is, as we loosen up, is expand that maybe to a close friend. So you have a bubble of 2 families, maybe 3. And that, you try and live within that bubble. So if you go to get your haircut, that's an interaction with one person, right? It's not the same as sitting in a classroom or in a workspace with 15 or 30 or 50 people. So that's why things like haircuts, hair salons are opening soon, because it's a minimal action. You're going to make an appointment. You're only going to be able to show up in time for the appointment. Your hairdresser will probably have a mask on. You may have a mask on too. You'll do your thing and you'll leave, and then another customer will come in. So it's going to be very antisocial, if I can put it that way. Very similar for a lot of people. I saw some of the questions I know are about golf. People are wondering, why did golf courses open up? And it's a very similar thing. There are rules about what time you can go to the tee, and you're supposed to stay 6 feet apart, and you can't putt, and you can't touch the flag sticks. There's all these new rules that we're going to learn to adapt with in society.
What about slightly larger gatherings like weddings? How are they going to work?
Well, I was dealing with this personally. My very close nephew had a wedding planned for this summer, and until this week it was going ahead, and they've decided to pull the plug. So I think any large gatherings, legally in Canada, the biggest gathering allowed anywhere is 50 people, and that's in BC. But even there, they say don't push it, right? So realistically, most laws, provincial laws that exist currently, gatherings are limited to no more than 5 people. So I think anything, a couple of dozen people, that's going to be a non-starter, at least until the fall, because the fall is the other big question mark. What happens in September, October, when the usual flu season comes along? Based on past pandemics, they tell us we're going to have a second wave, and it'll probably be worse. So things are bad now, but everyone anticipates that it'll be worse the next time around, which would likely be September or October.
Do we actually know enough right now about how transmission of the coronavirus works, this novel virus? Do we know enough to be making some of these decisions?
I think we know quite well how it spreads. I think what we don't know is the long-term impact. It's the immunity part of the puzzle that's really a big question mark, right? So we know, if you cough in my face, I have a pretty good chance of being infected. If you walk by me in the street, the chance is almost nil. If we know from good studies done in China, if you live in a house with someone who's infected, say you have a kid who's infected, you have about a 1/3 to a 50% chance of being infected within the week. So we know that stuff. We know the odds, but what we don't know is the consequences. There are probably a lot of households in Canada where everybody's been infected, kind of had a cold, got better, and that was it. And I think that's how COVID is going to be for a lot of people. But what we don't know is, does that protect you from getting infected again? That's the big mystery, is what's the immunity? How long does it last? Is it absolute? And different viruses have different consequences. Like if you get the measles once as a child, you're protected for life. If you get a coronavirus, the ones that existed before this one came along, which give us colds, you can get those 10 times.
Over and over again.
This one seems to be somewhere in between, but we don't know. So there seems to be some immunity, but we don't know how long it'll last, how powerful it is. And that's a really essential question especially for people going back into congregate settings, so workplaces, schools, daycares, anywhere where you're going to have close interaction. Immunity is going to be essential.